Hello and welcome to the interview. Tonight, my guest is Usman Mamake Bujang, lecturer of African history at the University of the Gambia. And we will be looking at independence, the rise of African nationalism, independence in West Africa, and in particular, the independence of the Republic of the Gambia. Professor, welcome to the program. Pleasure to have you. Let us begin with looking at the rise of African nationalism. I know there are names that will come later, but to look at African nationalism, one doesn't have to forget about people like Samori Touré and the likes.
Yeah. Nationalism, in simple terms, as the desire of Africans to rule themselves as an independent nation, was older than colonialism. Africans had a deep desire to have their own political and cultural identity. The early political leaders who resisted European subjugation and colonization, we refer them as the first nationalists in Africa. The resistance of Samori Touré, the resistance of Mohamed Lamin Dramé, the resistance of Albury Njai, the resistance of Ladjo Diop, the Damel of Kajor, the resistance of Baibure, the king of the Temene kingdom, the resistance of Jaja of Opobo, and numerous others, who were the first resistant leaders to resist colonialism, were the first nationalists in Africa. And their efforts were followed by African educated elites as late as the 19th century. The educated elites founded an organization in 1897 in Ghana that they call Aborigines Right Protection Organization. And in Nigeria, another organization was formed by elites that they called the Anti-Slavery and Aborigines Rights Society. Now, these societies were fighting for the emancipation of colonial Africa, not only limited to the countries that they were founded. And their efforts were taken up by Pan-African movements. Men like William Dubois, Marcus Garvey, George Padmore. William Dubois founded an organization that he called the National Association for the Advancement of Color. Marcus Garvey launched the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and he also founded a newspaper that he called the Negro Wall. And Padmore became an advisor to many African resistance leaders such as Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Their efforts were also taken up by the African nationalists in the late 1920s. And many prominent societies were formed. One of the most important prominent society was the National Congress of British West Africa. Now, this Congress did a lot, although they did not clamor for independence. But their agitation was the opportunity to have extended representative in the Legislative Council, and also opportunity to have key positions in civil service. So they made a very important resolution in 1919 in Accra. And in this resolution, they said Africans must have the right to participate in their own form of government. Africans, with the principle that government exists for the natives, and not the natives for the government. They want greater opportunity in education, greater opportunity in commerce, greater opportunity in medical and legal services. And they also asked colonial government to give them opportunity in commerce, which is very important, because they said the large European firms had established their tentacles in all parts of Africa, exploiting the natural resources of Africa. Such large firms such as the United African Company, the Commonwealth Development Corporation, CFAO, and numerous others, they were exploiting African resources. So these organizations were asking for greater opportunity in commerce, in politics, in legislative council, in education, in medical and legal services, which Africans, those positions or professions were a no-go area for Africans. So the trend went like that until the youth also took over the struggle. There were youth organizations that were very, very instrumental. Edward Francis Small in the Gambia, he founded the Gambia Native Defensive Union. And there was also other unions formed in British West Africa, like the Nigeria Youth Movement was formed in 1990. J.B. Dankwa was a very important Ghanaian figure. He founded the Gold Coast Youth Conference. And there was also West African Youth League, founded by I.T.A. Wallace Johnson. Now, these youth organizations also spearheaded the nationalist aspirations of Africans. And the trend went introduced until the Second World War. During the war, it was also very important because the Europeans were telling Africans that Germany was the aggressor. So they have to assist to fight the aggressor in order to have their self-rule. This was what they told Africans, that they were fighting for survival.
And that wasn't the case. In fact, sometimes it makes me wonder, what were Africans doing in a war that never concerned them? But the end of the Second World War gave rise to more African nationalism.
Yeah.
In some countries, okay, for example, in Haiti, it was a revolution, a bloody revolution fought by Toussaint Louverture. And in other countries, it was constitutional change and constitutional development. But then the Second World War gave rise to a lot of Africans to think about, why do we have to fight a war that doesn't concern us? Why don't we fight a war that will get us from the bondage of colonialism?
You know, during the war, the political propaganda the Europeans were using, that Africans were fighting for survival. Africans were fighting for freedom, for liberty, for justice and self-determination. So after the war, the Africans were asking this question: where is the liberty that we were talking about? Where is the freedom? And in fact, the war broke the myth of European superiority. Africans who participated in the war have seen a lot of defects, a lot of weaknesses of the Europeans. They have seen that the Europeans, that myth that the Europeans were superior, Tibabs are these, they are just equal to devils, to angels. They were not that. They were, some of them deserted the war, thrown their guns and hide. And also, the Africans were asking, where is the liberty that you promise us? Where is the self-determination that you promise us? Also, during the war, France, Britain and the United States signed the Atlantic Charter, which called for the idea of democracy, freedom, liberty, and fundamental rights of an individual. They made a declaration in the Charter that all peoples have the right to choose their own form of government they want to choose. So Africans were saying, you say all peoples have the right to choose their own form of government in which under which they live. So are we not one of the people? Are we different from the category of people that we are referring to in the Charter? So that brought about the African agitation. Militant groups were formed. And these militant groups, there were two, as you said, there were two categories of militant groups. So militant groups were very peaceful. They passed their grievances through newspapers and resolutions and petitions to government through constitutional means. Those were the militant groups that were asking for independence, but through peaceful means. But there were other radical groups that were very confrontational. We have seen that in the FLNA in Algeria, the Mau Mau struggle in Kenya, and numerous others. Later in Guinea-Bissau, in Mozambique, Angola, all these were militant groups that were very confrontational. They organized demonstrations, strike, riots, and even ended up in forming guerrilla groups.
Let me take you to the road to independence. Ghana was one of the first to become independent, 1957. I think Egypt, 1958, and then the others followed. Senegal, 1960, Nigeria, 1960, Gambia, 1965. How was this transition like?
The education institutions play a greater part in that. At Chimota College, for instance, most of the graduates ended up becoming radical political activists. At the Forebay College, the same